Okay, dear participants, welcome to the day 2 of the GIREP Webinar 2021. I am Charles Bonello, and I am a member of the Department of Mathematics and Science Education, the Faculty of Education, University of Malta. I hope that yesterday's keynotes and working group sessions were fruitful and helped you to engage with the subject we are all so passionate about. Today's webinar session will consist of 2 keynote presentations, and in between we'll be having work group discussions in parallel sessions. I have the pleasure to welcome today's first keynote speaker, a friend and colleague of mine, Professor Suzanne Gatt. Suzanne is a professor in primary science and environmental education at the Faculty of Education, University of Malta. She is a teacher trainer in primary science with a particular interest in inquiry-based learning. Professor Gatt has published internationally in the area of science and environmental education at primary level. She is currently co-content editor of the Journal of Emergent Science of the ASE, United Kingdom. Professor Gatt also has implemented a number of EU-funded projects such as Comenius and Erasmus+. She has also coordinated FP7 EU-funded project, PRI-SciNet. This project involved the development of a number of inquiry-based learning activities in science for children between the age of 5 and 11 years. The project also included the training of primary teachers on how to implement these inquiries. Today, Suzanne will deliver a presentation entitled Young Children Interacting with the Physical World. Suzanne, the floor is yours.
Okay, let me share the screen. Thank you. Good evening. Good afternoon, actually. Just let me share. Okay. Today's presentation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and forth a little bit between older students learning physics and how young children interact with physics and physical phenomena in the world. Just a moment. Okay. So what will the presentation involve? The presentation will start with reflections on students' attitudes towards physics. And then I move down to young children's natural interest and reflect on children's natural interest in the world around them. Children's inquiries. There's a lot of work being done currently at preschool level, at primary level, of children doing science. And this type of inquiry is different from what inquiries look like at secondary level. So it's good to have a look at and also give a number of examples. Actually, I have one main one and another one, because otherwise I will not manage everything in the 40 minutes that I have, and see what features and what approaches there are being used in inquiry with young children, which make it different from traditional learning of physics, and ask ourselves, is there anything that we can take from what has been developed in pedagogy of implementing scientific-oriented activities with young children to engage students at an older age? I have to say, although I have been at university teaching and doing teacher training since 1995, I still very much feel a teacher at heart. I taught, I am by first training a physics teacher, and I taught students at secondary, mainly at secondary and even at pre-university level. But my dissertations, I remember my undergraduate, I was in primary, then in early secondary, then my PhD was in secondary. And eventually, sometimes this happens in people's professional lives, I have shifted and I have been working now on teaching of science to teachers at primary level, and in the past 5 years also mainly focusing on children at preschool. So we are talking also of doing scientific activities as from the age of 3. I have to say that one of the things that I noticed from my experience when I used to teach physics, that over the years somehow more students were feeling bored. They were bored with physics. They were working less, and they used to complain very much that physics seems to be detached from life. It's abstract, okay? And to me, this was honestly, as a teacher of physics, to me, it was strange and difficult to accept, because let's face it, I mean, if you look at, I know that there are many physicists like me who are teaching at different levels. Whenever we do physics, they always apply to practical situations. For example, I do remember using stories, because I always love to use stories, you know, to explain how, why you can hear people fighting, but you cannot see them punch each other. Okay, when I was working with waves, that when the bus driver brakes suddenly, everybody moves forward. And how you can power the light of a bicycle when you cycle, because it's a dynamo. And somehow, despite the examples given in class, many times students still feel detached from doing physics. Research shows that the attitude towards science drops drastically when children move from primary to secondary. And from first year of secondary onwards, it keeps falling and falling and falling. So what's different? Why is this happening? So what I'm going to do next now is I'm going to shift to what we're doing with young children, because if anything, if there is anything with doing scientific engagement and having children engaging with the physical world, is that they are highly engaged and highly motivated. So let's shift our attention to young children. This, I start with an example, which probably if you are in a waiting room full of mothers with children, you will often come across seeing children who keep dropping the keys, and the mother picks it and the child drops it again. Okay, this has nothing to do with the child trying to give the mother a hard time. This is a child who is trying to make sense of how the world works. So dropping the keys and asking, will it happen again if I try it again and again and again and again? Okay. One thing which is common with young children is they repeat things. They like consistency. So they are testing the consistency. Same thing as you can see in the other picture, is they like to test what happens when you put objects in water. What you see there is what we call it a sensory box, because there are things that children can touch and play with, and they can do whatever they like. And if you sit in a class, in a preschool class, you will notice that some children will keep at it and at it and at it, engaged, sometimes for even more than an hour. Now, one thing which many teachers usually complain with students is that their attention span is not longer than 10 minutes, especially with young children. So what is it that gets these children, keeps these children going and trying things over and over and trying different things, engaged with an activity for so long time? So as you can see, okay, I've just mentioned 2 examples, which are examples of children's early interaction with physics. Now I have to say that if one talks to early childhood general pedagogists, in most cases, they are not aware of how much science there is in these 2 activities. Okay, but there is now a lot of work, and at some point I touch on what I call conversations with children, that this engagement, this children's evident and innate engagement and interest to try things to try and find out how things work can really be good circumstances, situations, opportunities for young children to start engaging with the physical world and learn basic physics, content, process, and also about the nature of how we test from as young age as preschool. So what makes old students disengaged? Okay, to me personally, my personal opinion, I think that older students have lost the authenticity, the authentic experience of engaging with the real world within a real context. We do not have labs in primary education. We don't want beakers. We don't want special equipment. We use everyday things. We use things which are part of the child's natural environment, things they are familiar with. Is this that maybe is affecting the motivation to engage with the natural world and learn about how it works? So what can we learn from young children's engagement as educators, from what we're doing? Are there lessons that we can take and maybe shift and try and see why when children become older students that they lose this enthusiasm that is so evident with young children? Okay, so before we go deeper into the issue of learning science and physics concepts, we have to keep in mind that children are young, and because they are so young, they have not yet developed enough literacy and literacy skills which enable to articulate their thoughts clearly. So what does this mean? This means that if you were to ask a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old under the age of 8, it's very difficult for young children to express and articulate clearly their thinking. Okay, this doesn't mean they don't think. Okay, but we have to keep that in mind. They also lack the technical language. I remember being in a class of 3-year-olds, which can be a confusing environment, but they had this big bath full of water, and they were throwing things. And the children were saying, one child was saying to another, it goes to the bottom, it goes to the bottom. And this showed how they didn't even know the technical, even basic technical language, floating and sinking. And it was the teacher who was saying, it goes to the bottom, it sinks, it stays at the top, it floats. Okay, so children don't have the oracy well developed, and they may not have also the technical language. And we also, as adults, because children speak, talk, and behave in different ways, we also assume that children are not necessarily capable of a certain level of depth, of thought, of thinking, of making connections. Okay, and maybe we are wrong, because as I will give explanation, an example further on. This is often not the case, but it is reading and communicating with these children which may be the problem, but not the thinking. Okay, as children want to learn how the world works, they do observe and ask about phenomena around them. One main characteristic of young children is that they ask a lot of questions, really a lot of questions. I remember my own children used to ask questions while driving to school. I remember vividly, being asked, but mommy, why is the rainbow a semicircle? Why isn't it straight? What makes it semicircle? Okay, to me, it was not the right time to ask me questions like that, because it's not easy to explain complex physics to a 7-year-old. Okay, but it shows how children do notice things about the world around them much more and many times more than older students and adults do. Children may not have developed oracy and literacy skills, but they still can express themselves in different ways. If one reads a lot of work of the Reggio Emilia approach in early childhood education, okay, and here I refer to Malaguzzi's 100 Languages of Children. Children do communicate, but not necessarily in writing and speaking. It's what they do through their actions, through their facial expressions, through the way they interact with others. There are so many ways of interaction. Because children don't have the skills, the literacy and oracy skills that we adults have, we have lost many of our capability of communicating in other ways, but children still use these. They do communicate, okay? They ask questions as they try to make sense, of the world around them. They develop ideas about how the world works. Okay, it doesn't mean that they do not really learn anything, that they don't know anything about the world, that we have to fill their brains with stuff and ideas. As they live in everyday life, as they engage with their parents, friends at school, they start learning about how the world works. Not always necessarily correct physics, okay? For example, it's common for a child to tell you that an object sinks because it's heavy. It is what we call an alternative framework or misconception, but it is also an opportunity to help the child learn more, because we know that it is all about density. And we also know that when they're young, they haven't yet undergone enough cognitive development to understand certain physical phenomena. Taking again the example of density. Density is a combination of mass and volume. There you have three factors. So difficult for young children to deal with two, let alone with three factors. So some things are difficult, some language is missing, but this does not give us, it does not mean that we can dismiss and they are not capable to learn. So children learn with the physical world in a much more engaged and involved way than older students. If you look just at these two photos, it's not only the activities that they're doing, which we can notice, but the enthusiasm, the fun, the engagement, they're interested, they like what they're doing, they want to know more, all right? And if you teach secondary students, this unfortunately is very rare to experience anymore as a teacher. So what can we do to maintain this engagement, both among young children, because as a primary educator, I can also say that when children grow a little bit older, even in mid-primary, this enthusiasm, this will to ask questions starts to decrease. So the problem with the education system starts even within the primary level. So that they remain interested. What can we do? Interested in the world. When they move to the official study of physics, they should be so enthusiastic that they are the ones who bombard the teachers with questions, and not the teacher who makes an effort to try to get them engaged. So how do children learn physics? Some reflections. What I have to say is learning about physics and physical concepts when you're dealing with young children looks very different from the physics one teaches in secondary and post-secondary. And I have to say that sometimes I felt as a physics teacher, I reflect, I say, well, probably if some of my colleagues just see what I'm doing with these young kids, they will even, my old teachers and old physicists, they would turn in their grave. What is she doing? This is definitely loose and not, there isn't that rigor as much as the traditional physics. So what I want what is so different? What is less formal what is still very much scientific and good physics learning. So learning physics or science in the early years, because we do not distinguish between different areas of science, is to the approach in secondary, is that the language we use is informal, okay, especially at preschool. We not even go into the question and answer. I go around preschool, and whenever I say, what's this, what's this, what's this, it's like, you are not teaching there. Because with young children, it's conversations. We engage in conversations. So the child is throwing things in water and turns at the teacher, look, it goes to the bottom. Ah, I say, that's interesting. Is it the only one? And the child will try and say, okay, so what about the other one, you know? So you engage in neutral conversation so that the child follows the interest, his interest and his investigation. So we are loose with language, yes, because they do not have yet the literacy skills. There is no need to expect children to provide formal and complex explanations. Yes, I thought it went to the bottom. We can teach some technical words, it sinks, okay? But I would never dream to mention the word density, and I can say, okay, what was it made of? So children do understand that some materials float and some materials sink, which is the closest they can get. But it is better than thinking than that heavy things sink and light things float, because it's a prerequisite to coming to the concept of density. But what is so scientific still in these simple activities? Children keep their authentic interest in the world around them. If there is one thing that we advocate a lot with young children in the early years, and now in Malta, I'm happy to say that this is going to be even stretched to the age of 7, is that learning and teaching follows children's interests. So if children are interested about bees, they can learn a lot about bees, how wings fly. If they were interested in transport, they can do things about machines. If they are interested about the wind, they can do a whole range of activities, learning about air. How do you move air? Does air exert force? But it is their interest in their world around them. It's not something somebody else thought that students are interested in. They learn how to pose questions, which can be answered to an investigation. I had a student who worked with 5-year-olds, and they learned how to ask questions, which they could, scientific questions, which they could then investigate. It's not as easy as one thinks, and it's a very difficult skill. They also learn how to use observations as evidence to draw conclusions. So even at the age of 5, so what did you notice? Why are you saying this? Based on what are you saying this? Do you agree? Yes, do you agree? Okay. How sure are you of this? These are questions which are very important process skills when we learn how to do science, because science is not just from books and understanding concepts, but a major aspect of it is this process of doing science, of doing physics investigations. So what should we invest in with young children? And when we talk even up to primary, the focus on conceptual understanding is much less important. Of course, if there is, you cannot teach, do science without a context, but it's not important that you read from books and they know definitions and maybe even the accuracy, what if we're talking about speed and not velocity, it's not necessary. Okay, there's no need to learn definitions or for in-depth, complex, abstract explanations, but it is very important to start engaging children in these meaningful conversations. So why do you think that is happening? What did you observe? Why is that? Why are you saying that? Okay, but the process of investigation is what gains focus and importance. The children from a very young age can learn how to actually do fair testing. I've seen it done even from an age of 3. Children know what's fair and what's fair. It's innate in them. So one can do complex investigations about simple scientific concepts with simple engagement, but complex and rigorous fair testing. What does it do also? It provides a more realistic view of how scientists' physics work, about the nature of science. We are seeing now, people think that science and medicine is all 100% accurate. As scientists, we know that is not the case. But in school, that is the way children view science, because that's the way it's presented. And here with young children, say, okay, so we've tried this. How sure are you? Okay, can you improve your investigation? Does it always happen? And these engagement, because they are actually engaging with the real world, where sometimes experiments don't work exactly as you like, and the answer is not really that important, but what's important is to reflect about the observations you make, then automatically children realize that science, doing these investigations, are not that absolute right answer approach, which we tend traditionally to give as an image to physics and other sciences. So if we want to engage students at an older age, what is our main objective? Is to keep children's innate motivation to engage with the physical world as they learn how it works by carrying out investigations. Now we know that our youths are very much engaged, but not in physics. They are engaged in social media. They are engaged in leisure aspects. But we also know that some young people are also those who usually pursue with their convictions, and they can be strong if they are strongly committed to something, that they really do give a lot. So the innate nature of being engaged is there. It's only not anymore about the world, the natural world, and how it works. How can we conserve that? And I would say that if there is anything that inquiry-based learning actually contributes to learning science and about physical concepts, is inquiry-based learning. Why? Because it encourages questions. It starts with a question, with a problem. What do you want to know? Based on what you want to know or what you want to learn about, you carry out an investigation. You carry out investigation, you collect your evidence, but this evidence is not absolute. It's like evidence. So you use it to build an argument when you draw your conclusions. And this is when they start learning physical, if they have these skills, and the more you are able to investigate and find answers, potential answers, okay, or an answer which says, I cannot answer this question, the more children are engaged to learn. You keep ongoing that will to ask, to learn, to know more about things, to know more about the world around you. So, as I said, inquiry-based learning, that is, it's very important that it tackles authentic physical phenomena. I do remember my days in the physics lab, both as a student, as a teacher, where, you have a pendulum and you measure its period. But we don't talk about clocks, do we? And how we use the pendulum for clocks. So somehow, in moving from the authentic world to the laboratory, we have lost the authenticity. One can argue, yes, we are still testing and investigating nature, yes, but not in an authentic context. And this is what we do in the emerging curriculum, where we follow children's authentic contexts. In carrying out investigations where children engage in making observations and gather data, sources of evidence. And I can tell you that what they do is highly scientific. They use it to arrive potential answers, and then they have to present it to others, like scientists do, to others, where they are expose their opinions and their conclusions to being tested and questioned by others. And this is where they have to use their observations as evidence to defend their position. Let me give quickly, because I can see an example. Okay, this was an example, one of the examples that we developed in the FP7 project, an inquiry, and it was about magnets. It was carried out, the one we tested, it was carried out with a class of 5-year-old boys in a church school in Malta. And the teacher went, it was sometime early December, and she went to class and she told them, listen, I have a problem here, I need your help. I have these 5 presents. I have bought them online. So you see the authenticity. They came all wrapped. One of them is a magnet. I bought a magnet for my nephew. I don't want to tear the wrapping. How can I find which one is the magnet? Can you help me? So as you can see here, the teacher doesn't go there. So, okay, this is a magnet. It attracts metals. Let's see what it attracts. The teacher doesn't tell. The teacher sets the children thinking, doesn't give the knowledge, but makes them go and look for it. And what she did was, she had five wrapped objects. 2 were non-metals, 2 were metals, and only 1 was a magnet. The children worked in groups, and there were 4 groups. And I was the observer. And this was very, very interesting to me, because I think the students taught me a very important lesson. There was one group who found this very difficult. They were not sure what a magnet is. They had never really come across a magnet. They played around with the presents where they were not sure what to do. So here is where the teacher went in to scaffold. So she said, okay, do you have a fridge at home? You know the fridge magnets? And that was all she said. One of them said, I know what a fridge magnet is. It sticks to the fridge. It sticks to the fridge because it's, it's metal. And they looked around, and this was not planned, but the class, actually, there was one metal cupboard which looked very much like a fridge. And the children suddenly took the presents and ran and tried to stick all of them, just to see which one really was attracted to it. So, and then they said, okay, this is it. They didn't reach, it was very basic. They didn't know the scientific knowledge, which in this case was that magnetics, stick to metals, but it was done in an authentic way. 2 other groups knew what magnets were, and they knew that they stuck to metals. So they said, okay, let's look around the class. Let's see what's made of metal. They did not go to the cupboard. They actually realized that the legs of their chairs were made of metal, and they said, okay, what do we do? Let's touch them. And they did find the metal, but they were not 100% sure. They said, okay, I think we need to check with the other metal. Let's see. So they went and tried it a number of times. So they needed to ensure the accuracy of the result by trying it a number of times. So here the children did possess the knowledge, and they were able to use that knowledge to solve the problem. But to my surprise was the 3rd group, because they didn't use anything else. They didn't go to stick the object to metal, to some metal. They just fiddled around. And they were chatting. And at one point, one boy raised this and said, this is the magnet. And I said, how do you know? Because he actually spoke to me. He said, how do you know that this one is the magnet? He said, okay, so we have 5. Okay, now here I've given them A, B, C, D, E. But they were saying, look, these 2, they don't stick to anything. So they cannot be magnets because they just don't stick. And we know that magnets do stick. Then we said, look, these 2 stick with C and D, stick with E, but then we put them together and they do not stick together. A magnet always sticks. So they are not a magnet. It must be E, because E is the only one which stuck to both C and D on their own, okay? And C and D didn't stick to each other. Now, I have to say, To me, this was highly surprising, because to have 5-year-olds thinking in such abstract level, and I remembered my 16, 17-year-old students, and I was sure that the great majority of them wouldn't have managed to tackle this problem in such complexity, okay, to deduce which one was the magnet. They managed without using any extra equipment. So here you have an example where 5-year-olds demonstrated a high level of activity. I remember one of these boys, when I was going every 2 weeks, and it was fun because they used to tell me about what they were doing. They used to wait for me. The enthusiasm, we tested this, we tested that. But I did ask, do you like this, what you're doing? He said, yes. What's different? Is there anything special? And you know, when you get a clever, I think he must have been a clever boy. And he looked at me, and after pausing, you know, that 15, 20-second pause, he said, this science is not in the book. It's not content, it's not detached, really. That is what he meant. Quickly, okay, because I would have liked to, this is an activity which I have used and done from ages 3 to adulthood. And I can say that this is an activity which works with all ages and engages all, especially adult males, I have to say, because it's a nice game. And this is how the teacher does it. One thing that all children have in classrooms in preschool are bricks. They love playing with bricks. So the teacher goes and say, okay, today I'm going to ask you to do something. I want to see who of you in groups can build a strong wall. And then we're going to test it to see which one is the strongest. Now, if one really talks about physics, here we are talking about stability and center of gravity. This is something which the teacher doesn't need to talk about, but if it is raised, the teacher can talk about, okay? And she starts distributing the bricks. So a cheeky teacher would give, you know, one with four parts to one group and a smaller brick to another group. And obviously children will complain and they will say, it's not fair. And ask me, why isn't it fair? It's because you gave 1 of 4 to one and 1 of 2 to the other. So what do you have to do? You have to give the same. If you give 1 of 4 to one group, you have to give 1 4 to the other group. Okay? And they all build their wall, which are 4 different walls, but with the same amount and same type of bricks each group. And then this, okay, so how are we going to test it? The first contribution, usually suggestion, is we take a ball and we throw it at the wall. Okay, and you get, again, it's not fair. Why? Because how am I going to know if you throw it fast and strong or if you throw it slowly? We need to find a way how we always hit it the same. And this is where the teacher helps. And we are all familiar, as you see in the lower picture, the ramp. And even 3-year-olds will tell you, if you cannot push the car, you have to let it go down. You cannot put the wall at one point in one case and the wall far away in another case. Doesn't this sound very familiar with physics experiments? Isn't this a classical example of fair testing? Not only so, the nature of science is so evident that I haven't had one single group of children trying it out who haven't said, once is not enough, we have to repeat it again. And I have had many children asking for 2, 3 repeats, the repeated readings. So yes, we are playing with bricks, but what we are doing is very complex fair testing, which is extremely important for students to have when they come to tackle more complex investigations. Why? Because the skills, the process skills, and the attitudes and understanding the nature of science and physics is not something that you develop quickly. It's not something you read off a book and learn in a very short time. So what do we learn from these examples? We learn that it's very important to get children and older students too, to interact with the physical world in an authentic way. I argue that we have lost the authenticity of learning physics. We have forgotten what it means to interact directly with the world. And we have to do this in an authentic way because it promotes deeper engagement. It makes sense. Okay, if you talk about waves and drawing on the board, it makes no sense. But talk to students about their musical instruments, about their radio, or maybe their music, and they will be engaged. And get the music into the classroom, or else take the students to the music outside of the classroom. And this promotes both physics learning as well as the learning of the language of physics. So the complexity will be there still. It's the context which can change. And this is the approach that we need to keep, because even in primary, we start losing it by the age of 9. It becomes complex and fun. We remove the authenticity of actually trying things out, that we go in the yard, let's try this, let's see this, let's see this. Okay, what do you want to try out? And keep schooling it from becoming formalized, especially when it comes to learn physics. I would say everything, but particularly here, physics. So as a final reflection, what I would say is that the experience of teaching about physics phenomena to young children can in a way help us to understand better how to maintain students engaged. Okay, so maybe we've moved from doing science with older students to learning how to do it with young children, but maybe now we can take the lessons that we are learning from the young children themselves and how they engage and the level of insight that they can engage in, okay, and to keep the love of learning physics about the world around us also when they grow up. And that these methodological approaches in the early years can help us re-engage students to have fun when they come and learn physics, even at an older age, so that we keep more engaged, more will learn, more will enjoy it, and we can keep and share the love of learning of physics, which all of us probably who have taken physics as their specialization still have till today. And with this, I thank you. I hope my presentation was of interest. I believe there may be some time for questions, right, Charles?
Thank you very much, Suzanne. For sharing with us not only your experience and your research, but also some very interesting insights about how young children interact with the physical world and learn. All right, let's have a minute or two for a question or two. If there is anybody who would like to ask a question.
Or maybe.
Okay, I just would like to ask you, maybe Suzanne, to what would you say to a secondary school teacher who, who actually lives in a very formal environment about this informality and this authenticity? I mean, how would you go about it in that environment?
Okay, I mean, maybe one is to try and find ways that rather than telling stories and sort of they learn by proxy because you share an experience somebody else had, that maybe they make few efforts even within the school environment, okay, to experience physics themselves. I'm helping a PhD student, and one of the things she was doing in Newton's laws of motion, because that's how her PhD is on, about crumple zones and what she gave is, she gave them a dozen eggs, and they had to see out of 3 materials to test which one is best, what they can do so that they drop an egg and it doesn't break. And this is an example of a real situation. Okay, personally, I probably would have gone to the supermarket and bought different types of packaging. You find cheap plastic packaging, which isn't as good as the cardboard, or different types of packaging, and they can test it because that's reality. They go to the supermarket, that's what they see. So it's trying to find as much as possible investigations which use everyday, which test things which are part of their everyday life. That is what I would say. It needs a lot of thought, creativity. So, and I would tell teachers that they cannot change this practice overnight, even for the students to get used to it. But you can add slowly, change your repertoire, maybe have a couple of examples every year. And then in 5 years' time, you can have 10, 12, 15 different investigations, which are very practical and relevant to the student's life. So, so I would say, look for practical things and also give yourself time to adjust. You cannot do this, in a matter of a month.
Thank you very much. Marisa, would you like to ask a question also?
Charles,
Yes,
just
yes,
to interrupt you a moment, there was also a question from Federico. I give before, in fact.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't see that.
Sorry, just to keep the order.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. Yes, Federico, you would like to ask?
Yes, thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Charles, and thank you, Marisa. Sorry. Do you hear me? Because I'm on.
Yes, we do.
Okay, I would thank very much Suzanne for her enthusiasm in saying what he said, and in saying many points that are very close to what I told in my keynotes yesterday. I enjoyed very much when you told that conceptual understanding is of less importance, but it is important to engage children in meaningful conversation. I would say better that engage children in meaningful conversation is conceptual understanding.
Yes.
Because in natural language, there are strict rules that are the same rules as in the scientific language. So if a child learns to speak in natural language, he is in the good way to reason in a scientific way, because the images, I would say, are the same. You described lots of examples. For example, that of the building of a wall, and if a child is able to build a wall and to make it drop, but maybe it is not able to say that it's the center of mass, or it is hard, or it is heavy, or not, or something like that. This does not mean that he has not concept in his mind, because we have to remember that language is a way of spoken language is a way of delivering concept, but also gestures, also doing is a meaningful way of delivering concept. So thank you, Suzanne. And I would be a little bit more radical in some cases than in your slides.
Okay. What I want, what I want just to add is in the building a wall activity, in majority of cases, the children build a wall and then pull it apart again, and they reflect on the strategy and build another wall with a different design. So there is where you see the thinking going on. You don't hear it because they cannot articulate it. But you are right, there are many different ways where you can see the learning and the conceptual understanding. But the main aim of the activity is not really targeting the conceptual understanding.
Marisa, your question, please.
Yes, my question is, first of all, to thank you for the high-level competence in which you offer us your contribution. First of all, I want to thank. Then, I am looking since a long time to the way in which we can build the formal thinking. And I discovered that children, just when they have time, enough time to work on exploration, being active in the way in which they can manage their own task or the task that they directly ask to themselves, they reach very high level of formal thinking or abstract thinking, and start to formalize this way of thinking by means of the under languages that you mentioned is just founded by Malaguzzi Center of Reggio Children. So the problem is how to prepare teachers for such a multiple PCK, because it's the PCK to be able to offer children the opportunity to grow their own formal structure of the scientific language, passing from the with the conceptual change from common science to physics 1. How to prepare teachers, how to give them in the short time that we have at university the opportunity for such a sort of competence.
Okay. I have, this is a challenge which I have been, really reflecting on, and I have worked with a few teachers, maybe a little bit prolonged, and what I've learned from teachers themselves is that they face a number of challenges. They need to understand, they need to have some level of confidence in the science, because the science that they are teaching. And many because they think you need a degree or a qualification in science to understand scientific concepts, which is not the case, because we're talking about simple issues and one can ask. They also have problems with the practical know-how, because our education system, at least in Malta, but many education systems, remove this hands-on perspective of doing things when you are learning at school. They need to learn also about inquiry, because inquiry, one of the characteristics of inquiry is about giving power and more space to the children, and you have to give up your control of what's happening in the class to a certain degree. And so there are many competencies, as you are rightly said, it's very difficult in pre-service teacher training to gain this. In Malta, we're realizing, because we have a BA in early years, those who do this, and we promote the same approach across all the areas of learning, they find it easier to implement. But it's not the teachers the only barrier, it's the education system. If you have a curriculum which is based on exams, and the exams tends to assess mainly knowledge, and this formal, and you have a timetable, so and the assessment, so you have the assessment, the curriculum, the school system, and the teacher, who all need to slowly adjust. What I can say is that when I've worked with teachers, that meant first I start saying, okay, I have these activities, do you want to try them out? And then I go there and we have these professional conversations after each activity, that slowly, I think the fastest experience that I had was over 6 months, there was this shift from what one would call a teacher who wants the activities ready, to a teacher who is more able to do things and design activities herself. I can see somebody in chat referring to the Creative Little Scientist. I was involved in that project. And yes, there in that project, we have many activities which we have documented. And I do remember in that project, we used to go to classrooms, and I used to take 5 photos of an activity. And what was amazing was when I showed the photos, both to the teachers, because no teacher ever sees their own teacher or own activity, but exceptionally the children. When they saw how they started, they continued the investigation and what they arrived at, they couldn't stop talking. The engagement was so great. So In a way, what I would say, what I've learned from teachers is, don't be unkind. Don't expect too much of yourself. Give yourself time and start changing your pedagogical approach slowly. Eventually you'll get there. You need time. Like learning how to swim takes time. Learning how to drive a car takes time. The same thing, to shift to inquiry, because it is a pedagogical paradigm shift. You have to give yourself time. So I would say not less than 6 months, and that is extremely fast. I would say you need 2-3 years to really feel that you are a good inquiry teacher. We have a number here in Malta. I wish there were more.
Thank you very much, Suzanne.
I thank you so much for exhaustive answer. Many thanks, many thanks.
Thank you, Marisa, and thank you, Suzanne. If there are others who wish to discuss some points that have been raised in this presentation, since we are running a bit out of time, please email Suzanne and continue your conversation online. We'll now start the work group discussions in parallel sessions. We will meet again and at 4:45 for the next keynote speaker who will be presenting in this event. Thank you very much.
Please use the links I sent you by email for the work group meetings just now. Bye-bye. See you.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you.
Process, Suzanne. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.